Hi, I'm Chef Kelly Yorke, and this is Therapeutic Cuisine. I specialize in developing recipes that target and alleviate varying human common health conditions. Today, we're going to talk about diabetes, a disease that is near and dear to a lot of people in this country. 30 million people in the United States have diabetes, and 8 million of those don't even know they have it. If you suspect that you do, you can go to your doctor and request a hemoglobin A1C test. When you have diabetes, there's two things that are going on. Either your own body isn't making enough insulin, or the insulin that it does make is not recognized by your body. Glucose is the food for your brain and for your body, and if your insulin isn't allowing it to get into your cells, then it's not a healthy condition. Today we're going to talk about a recipe that will address a diabetic diet. It's going to be a diabetic chocolate chip cookie. Who doesn't love chocolate chip cookies? This is not the time to go out and get a tube of cookie dough. Making it at home is a lot healthier. You can control what you're putting into your cookies. It's also fun to bake a batch of chocolate chip cookies on a cold winter morning. The cookies that we're going to make today are going to start out with a sugar and butter blend, and the sugar that we're going to use is a Splenda brown sugar blend. It's half Splenda, half brown sugar. That goes into a bowl. And we're also going to add a Smart Balance butter mix. It's also got omega-3s in that Smart Balance. Now the secret ingredient to this recipe is white beans. We puree them because they're going to blend into the mix, and they're high in fiber. They've got potassium and magnesium in them. You don't even taste them in this recipe though. And this allows us to cut down some of the fats. It also adds moisture. You're going to blend this up so it's nice and fluffy and smooth. And we're also going to add some flavoring, which is a little vanilla. Vanilla just kind of rounds out all the other flavors, just a little hint of a back note. And then finally, we're going to add some eggs. This is our wet batter. Mix that in, make sure everything is blended, and we're going to set that aside for a minute and then add the dries together. Okay, now the dry part of our mix. We're using a graham flour. It's important that you buy graham flour because it's a little different than whole wheat flour. It's a nutty flour. It's not ground as finely, so it's a little bit coarser. And you can just see it when you eat it, that it's a coarser grained flour. We're adding rolled oats, a little baking powder, and salt. That gets mixed together so it's blended nice and evenly, and then we're going to add our wet to our dry. Now this mix is a little wetter than most cookie creamed butter sugar mixes. And it's kind of the nature of this recipe because it needs that extra moisture with all of the whole grains that we're using. So we're going to mix that together and make our dough. When it's all blended in, the flour and the wet, I'm going to add some chocolate chips. Now the chocolate chips you want to use is a bittersweet chocolate, or you can use a sugar-free chocolate chip. You can get that in several retail grocery stores around the country, but I personally like to use the bittersweet chocolate chips. You don't want to use a milk chocolate. That's got a lot more sugar in it. With the milk and the sugar rate levels for a diabetic, that's not recommended. Okay, that's looking good. In go the chocolate chips. I also want to say that this is a good time to add nuts. Nuts are really good for a diabetic diet. They're high in magnesium, and if you put in walnuts, you're going to have extra omega-3s. And Brazil nuts are one of the richest foods for selenium. And selenium is good for diabetes as well. Okay, so there's our dough. Now I'm going to take my spoonfuls and put them on a cookie sheet, which I have pre-lined with some parchment paper. I also like to use a Silpat mat, or you can use nonstick foil. That way it makes cleaning your pan a lot easier. I like to use my hands. It's just easier than putting a spoonful and then pressing them down. You're going to get your hands dirty anyway. And I'm going to get these in the oven at 375 degrees and bake them for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll be back and we'll make a poached salmon chilled pasta plate. Now I'm going to make a diabetic chilled poached salmon plate with a vegetable pasta. Carbs are one of the things that you really need to watch when you're diabetic. And pasta is really full of carbs. So we're going to make a pasta that is almost half vegetables. But first we've got to poach the salmon. When you poach a salmon, you're going to make a court bouillon. And that is usually made with some kind of a broth, depending on what protein you're using. And we're using a fish stock. And I threw a little bit of lemons in there, some lemons and black peppercorns, a little bay leaf. You could stick a little white wine in. And I brought it to a boil. Then I'm going to ladle it very carefully over my salmon. And we're going to stick this in the oven and let it poach. I'm going to keep on ladling until I get these completely covered with broth. And then we're going to stick them in the oven and let them bake very gently. When I get finished poaching this, I'm going to chill them down in the refrigerator, still in the broth. One of the things you got to be careful with when you are cooking salmon or poaching salmon is if you bring the heat up too fast when you're poaching, you'll get those protein and the enzymes to come out of the meat, and it looks a little foamy. You can pull that off when you serve it, but it's just better to be very gentle and avoid it altogether. So we're almost there. I'm going to go ahead and stick this in the oven, and I'll be right back to saute my pasta and vegetables. While my salmon is poaching, I'm going to go ahead and saute some pasta. I'm going to heat a pan with a little olive oil in it, and I'm going to add some fenugreek seeds. Fenugreek seeds are wonderful for lowering the glucose levels. I'm going to shake the pan just a little bit and let those seeds cook in the hot oil. It brings out the oils of the seeds, and you'll start to get a little bit of a fragrance of the fenugreek. Once that happens, I'm going to add a fine herb mix. Fine herbs is a French term for a combination of chervil, tarragon, and parsley. Chervil and tarragon almost have a licorice-like flavor. It goes very good with the fenugreek. I'm also going to add a little salt and pepper. In goes the pasta, and I'm using a whole grain pasta that I cooked per the instructions on the package. Just boiled it in water and drained it. You can use linguine, fettuccine, spaghetti, any kind of stringy looking pasta. We're going to just coat that with the oil and the nice essence of the herbs. Once that's done, I'm going to stick it back in the bowl, and I'm going to saute my vegetable pasta. You can use the same pan, or you can use another clean pan. I like to wash dishes less, so I'm going to use the same pan. In goes some olive oil, and olive oil is rich in omega-3 fatty acids. You want to use a light olive oil. If you use a extra virgin and you heat it too long, it's a little unstable. The light olive oil doesn't have as many of the polyphenols in it, and it will be more stable for cooking at high heat. Olive oil has a pretty high smoke point. We're going to add the carrots first. They're a little bit harder. You always want to add your hard vegetables first. And saute them until they start to get a little soft. I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit and let those go. The next thing I'll do is add my squash. Now these vegetables were hand cut. I also like to use a mandolin or any kind of vegetable cutting machine. You can use your knife skills and cut them by hand, or use the mandolin and make a string that's 1/8 inch wide and long like a spaghetti or linguine. What we're trying to do here, the goal is to use half the amount of pasta and fill in with more veggies. Once the carrots start to get a little sheen on them and I can just smell the carotene and the sugars, I know it's time to add my squash. We're adding yellow and green squash for color. When the squash starts to brighten up, the greens and the yellows just start to pick up and pop, is when they're cooked just enough. We want to have them al dente. A little salt and pepper, just for a little extra flavor. And maybe 30 seconds more, and that's it on the veggies. Nice and crunchy, lightly seasoned, and a little bit soft, but bright in color. And now that we've made our vegetable pasta, I'm going to go and make a tomato vinaigrette dressing, and we'll come back and we'll plate this all up. But before I do that, I'm going to add some chopped scallions to my pasta. When I add them when they're hot, they cook a little bit too much. So that's all there is to the pasta, and we'll be right back. Now I'm going to make a tomato tarragon vinaigrette. When you buy vinaigrettes in the store, they're almost always made with a soy oil, and the soy oil is almost always going to be a GMO oil unless it's organic dressing, so it's a lot healthier to make your dressings at home. We're going to start out by cutting up a couple of Roma tomatoes, but I'm only going to use about one, so about half of them will go into my blender. I'm then going to add some tarragon vinaigrette and maple syrup. And I like to get 100% maple syrup, not the pancake syrup. We're then going to add some Dijon mustard, some black pepper, and the king of anti-inflammatories, which is turmeric. That good, beautiful yellow, earthy, some garlic powder, and some tomato paste. All of that goes into the blender, and finally a little bit of chopped fresh tarragon. Tarragon, again, is that French herb with a little bit of a licorice flavor, very distinct. If you can't find it, you can use it dry. I'm going to turn on the blender and get this blended up. And now I'm going to add some olive oil. So I'm going to take the top off and slowly add it to emulsify my dressing. Just a nice little stream. Kind of like when you make mayonnaise. But in this case, we're making tomato vinaigrette. You're going to pour all of the oil in until it's done. I'm going to put the top on a little bit and just give it a little bit more of a pulse. And that's it. That's how easy it is to make your dressing. I'm now going to take the top off and put it into a salad dressing jar and add some remaining tomatoes and tarragon. This you can store now in your refrigerator on hand when you want to eat it on your homemade salad. So let's chop up our remaining tomatoes. I like to dice them up to a pretty nice little mince, but you want to be able to see the pieces in your dressing. In they go into the jar. The remaining tarragon. Stick the lid on, and now it's ready for a shake. Okay, now that I have my dressing made, I'm going to go ahead and clean up a little bit. I'm going to come back and plate my chilled poached salmon cold plate. Okay, all the components for my chilled poached salmon cold plate are now made, so we're going to go ahead and plate it up. First, we're going to make a little bit of pasta on the plate, about 3 ounces, and add that tomato tarragon vinaigrette in a little ramekin at the top. Next comes the base of the pasta vegetables, or another 2 to 3 ounces. Make sure you get all that colorful carrot and green zucchini and yellow squash, nice and visible. And you can never have too many vegetables, so you can actually go a little heavy on that. Next, we're going to bring our salmon fillets over that have been chilled in the refrigerator, and that lays on top of the pasta. And we're going to garnish with a little bit of sliced cucumber or zucchini. I've taken slices and cut them in half, pretty thin, and I'm going to lay them right across the top. Around the edge of the plate, I'm just going to put a little confetti of red bell pepper. And then this plate can be chilled in the refrigerator if you're having a luncheon or a party where you want to make your plates ahead of time. It holds very well. Just put a little plastic wrap over it and it'll be ready when your guests come. And that's it. Chilled poached salmon cold plate with a vegetable pasta. Now I'm going to make a breakfast congee. This is diabetic friendly, and congee is a porridge-like mixture that's eaten in Asia for breakfast and for dinner, and it's usually made with savory ingredients. We're going to make a little bit of a creative spin on this congee by using fruits and vegetables and nuts and whole grains. We're going to get started by first thawing some frozen strawberries, and we're going to add them to our blender, along with some nice fresh carrot juice, which is full of vitamin A and beta-carotene. Next goes kiwi. I've coarsely chopped my kiwi up, seeds and all, but I peeled it, the skin off the outside, and then I'm going to add a low sodium tomato juice. And last but not least, some cinnamon. And cinnamon is wonderful for diabetic cuisine. If you take 2 grams a day, which is about a half a teaspoon, it can actually lower your glucose levels by 40%. So in goes the cinnamon. So I'm going to cover this and blend it. Just enough to get the vegetables and the fruits blended smooth. And then I'm going to add my grains. But first it goes into a nice heavy bottomed pot. We're going to add the grains, which is quinoa. And quinoa is a wonderful high protein grain superfood. And almonds that are ground. So the almond meal is going to give us a lot of magnesium, calcium, whole grain brown rice. And the superstar for diabetic cuisine is barley. Eating barley will lower your glucose level up to 40%. If you don't like barley, you really should learn to like it if you are diabetic. This grain alone can act like metformin. That's going to go into my mixture, and I'm going to add a heat to the bottom here and get it up to a boil. Once this boils, I'm going to reduce it to a simmer and either put it in a crock pot, a slow cooker, or just leave it on the stove, turn down the heat to a simmer, and let it cook all night. The good thing about this recipe is that because it cooks all night and it's ready in the morning, you could just scoop it into a coffee cup and then eat it on the go, like on the way to work or on the school bus to school. The last ingredient that I forgot to talk about was pumpkin puree. This is also going to go into my congee. This is going to give us a good source of vitamin A and beta-carotene. Pumpkin puree is different than the pumpkin pie mix that you'll see in the grocery store. That's loaded with sugars. It also has the spices in it. You just want a pure puree, which is the pumpkin fruit baked and pureed. And pumpkin is my very favorite fruit. I use it in cookies. You can cook it in sauces. It is a beautiful orange, golden color, and whenever you put it into recipes, it has that richness of a butternut squash buttery flavor to it. Pumpkin is just a superstar all around, and if you don't want to use it in the fall, it's available in the cans in the summer. And get creative. Put it in your pancake recipes. It's just a superfood that we really need to eat all year round. So I'm going to just give that one last stir and let this come up to a boil. Cover it and let it cook all night. Now, if you're not comfortable with cooking your pot on a low simmer, it could have a chance of burning or scorching on the bottom. I really recommend that you just pour this in once it's boiled into a slow cooker or a crock pot. If you don't have a crock pot, you can always go back to just cooking on the stove. But the key is to have it on very low, very gently all night long. So the next morning, you just scoop it into your bowls and you're ready to go. So we're going to let this simmer and we're going to come back and present all three of our dishes. Okay, all three of my diabetic dishes are finished now. I'm going to go ahead and plate up the congee. It's been simmering all night. It smells wonderful. I'm going to throw that into a bowl. And you can garnish this with, Greek yogurt, sliced fruits. I'm going to slice some strawberries here. And that'll give you a clue as to what ingredients are in the dish. So let's go ahead and put that right on top. Any old decorative way. And a nice heavy dollop of Greek yogurt is wonderful with this. Our cookies are diabetic and they are loaded with magnesium from the chocolate. We have whole grain oats, a little bit of cinnamon. Cinnamon is a wonderful spice. There's two kinds of cinnamon actually. There's one that's called the false cinnamon, and that comes from cassia. And when you look at cinnamon and you see it's curled up like a bark, when the cinnamon is curled up into the center, almost like an elephant ear, that's the false cinnamon. Cassia is actually the healthier cinnamon because that's what all the tests have been done on. The Ceylon cinnamon that comes from India is actually called the true cinnamon, and when you see it in jars, it's rolled up like a rug. It's all in one direction. So when it's curled in like an elephant ear, it is the false cinnamon, and when it's rolled in one direction, that's actually the true cinnamon. But the false cinnamon is the one that we get mostly in the United States, and it's actually the one that we use for all the tests that has shown us that all of the benefits for cinnamon is from the false. Now the cinnamon is also in our congee, so very good for diabetics. We have a chilled poached cold salmon plate, and we're cutting half of the pasta to bring down the carbs with fresh squash and zucchini, and a tomato vinaigrette that you make homemade so that you're not using those store-bought oils, and sometimes they're GMOs or they can even be a little rancid. It's just so much fresher and delicious to make it at home. A little milk. I like to serve almond milk with my cookies, but if you want to, any kind of milk, but I would suggest that you use a grass-fed milk that is organic and doesn't have the hormones, a hormone-free milk. And there you have it, 3 delicious diabetic dishes. And as the father of medicine, Hippocrates, said, "Let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food." I'm Chef Kelly Yorke, and this is Therapeutic Cuisine. We'll see you next time.